test it though? Okay.
Sure, I'll try it again. Hello, hello. Test, test. Test, test, test. Oh, you got me. All right, cool.
Can't do mic drop with these though. Need that one, so I can do a mic drop. Come on, we gotta have our priorities straight. I have a feeling once we let this genie out of the bottle, it's never coming back in. This
Well,
is,
if they'll update the laws to accommodate it,
well,
these are gonna be, I'm just gonna send them in with an attestation that it was passed. I mean, they send them back if they don't have signatures in a heartbeat,
right.
but, too
Oh,
bad.
yeah, but I meant, I was just like,
Oh.
I was thinking of the Terry Gurlane with the iPad, you know.
Oh, yeah, oh,
But
yeah.
if once this is out, people are like,
Oh, yeah,
we'll just
yeah.
do every meeting.
No,
I don't
they-
feel
they-
like it's snowing out. Let's have a Zoom
No,
meeting
that's what I
instead.
mean, they just need to catch up with it.
Oh, you mean for the signing stuff?
For
Yeah.
signing stuff, yeah. we
Well,
need to
right.
make that
Presumably,
relevant.
you could send the video of them approving it, right?
Send them a link to it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I could send them a copy of the minutes, is what they may start doing.
Right. Well, that's right. There's that camera too. So if they want, not that I care, but if they want it straight on, I can. Look how fat I look. Cool. This is all very cool.
I am currently the only participant.
Good.
Yeah, of course I do. Just because this is a pain,
Thought for
not
sure
for
Steve
any
would
other
be
reason.
here.
What?
Which Steve?
Oh, Stephen Whitaker. I thought
What
for
is
sure
Kevin
he would be
Casey
here.
doing?
Never know.
Just trying to get it angled so it's got John in the view.
Yeah, this works really well, actually. And we'll kick some of these folks off when their presentation is done. That's cool.
Straighten that out.
I never know which phone or time to follow here, because it's like mine says 6:23, and that says 6:28. What time is it?
I have 6:27.
6:27.
Great.
So the list on the right is the folks who are in, and we're just seeing the videos of the one.
Yeah, there we are. We got most everyone now.
Yeah, let me start unmuting people.
Looks like we have all council member present. Dan, Jack,
There's Donna.
Mayor, Donna, Connor.
Donna's there?
Is she there? I thought I saw she was.
Donna Bates is there, yeah.
Jay's there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
There's Lauren up there.
Lauren.
Yeah.
There's Lauren.
All right, everyone is unmuted now, so.
There's an unmute all button.
Where? Oh. Okay.
It's an official meeting time, so come on.
Do we need that white thing on the side?
No?
As we're about ready to get started, council, just so you know, in the room here is John Odom, the city clerk, Cameron Niedermeyer, David, our camera operator, Donna Barlow Casey, Tony Fakis, Kelly Murphy, and Seth Wood, and me. Did I miss anybody? No?
They must be hearing each other.
I think they're chatting.
Oh, they're probably sending chat messages to each other.
No one's on the line, by the way.
Oh, Mayor says she needs to be unmuted.
I thought I unmuted everyone. I'm sorry.
Okay, so what I've just learned is that as long as you have the power to mute or unmute us, if I remute myself because I need to do something else, and I assume this is true for everybody, we cannot then be unmuted. We cannot unmute ourselves.
Tell her I
So,
just changed that.
Note for the future. Okay.
That was just
In any case,
changed.
Yeah, I think we just changed that. I think we just fixed that.
okay, good. Phew. Okay, we're all learning. Good. Okay, well, I'm going to call the meeting to order. The first thing is to review and approve the agenda. We do not have very much on our agenda, but would anyone like to make any suggested changes? Okay. So with that, we'll consider the agenda approved. So on to general business and appearances. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to address the council on an issue otherwise not on our agenda. And in this format, I assume if you're here would want to say something, maybe just raise your hand and I'll recognize you. But to start out, I want to check with Bill and Cameron and John. Do you have anyone on the line that would like to, or in person, that would like to address the council?
There are no people here from the general public other than staff and David on the cameras. Cameron is staffing the phone line, and she says there's no one on the phone line.
Okay. Great. And looks like we have a few other folks joining us. Welcome. And would any of you like to say anything?
I can't see everybody. Can you see everybody?
There should be a way up at the top right where there's
Gallery. You can't see them all at once. You have to cruise. You have to stroll. Okay.
I'm trying.
There is a way to do it. Check
Mike
choose
Miller?
gallery view, and
Lauren?
everyone will be tiled, kind of like on the Brady Bunch.
Yeah.
There's a picture up on the upper right that has
Now I've blocked
like a
Bill.
square with a
Sorry.
bunch of little squares inside it, and if you click on that, you'll see everybody.
Hopefully that helps.
Bien, thank you.
Okay.
Brady Bunch. Well done, Jack. Thank you.
Generational reference.
Okay. So on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion regarding the consent agenda?
Can I, before you all do that, can I just do my due diligence here? This is
I have a
John.
couple of small edits I can give John.
Sure. Hang on one, Donna. Hang on one second. John, go ahead.
Yeah, just because I don't have it to pass out, the liquor licenses you all would be renewing, just for the record, as a second-class license application from Cumberland Farms, and a first-class, as well as a outside consumption permit from Bare Naked Growler, and they also have a second class as well.
And can you just clarify for us how this will work in terms of signatures? Normally, we pass around a book. What is the procedure for this format?
Well, for these, for the liquor license, the only one I can speak to, liquor control, from what I understand, hasn't caught quite up to the situation. So I'm just going to append a attested copy of the minutes and send them in, so hopefully they'll be all right. But for the bills,
And John, do you want to mention any changes to the minutes?
Oh, I flipped around the ones you sent me, the participants from the 18th. And it sounded like Donna wanted to get some technical changes to me. That's fine if they're non-substantive, then you can just send them to me.
So, Bill, do we have the ability to unmute ourselves now?
I believe so, yes.
I'm going to try it. Just,
Oh, more got muted.
okay, and I've unmuted myself. So I think at this point, because we can unmute ourselves, if you would take a minute to mute yourself if you're not otherwise speaking, that would be great. And Donna, you have some amendments? Yeah.
They're in the 11th minutes. It's the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, not committee. So, and Transportation Advisory Committee. So just some words there that I'll send John. I'm sorry I didn't notice. And I had a question which I think John answered on the 18th, that not everybody was on the phone.
Yeah, I had you all
I couldn't
flipped.
understand everything that John said.
I had you all flipped as far as the participants, so they're flipped back. Who participated where?
thank you.
And I believe we had a motion from Jack, was that right? And then Connor, did you second? Yep. Yep, okay. All right. And you understand that to be as amended by John and Donna, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So go ahead and unmute yourselves if you're not already. But all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Okay, so the consent agenda passes, and so we're on to the above and beyond recognition for the month of February. Bill, do you want to talk about this?
Sure, we'll just go quickly. The recipient is not here, but this month's recipient is Carrie McCool, who's one of our dispatchers, was nominated by several people for consistently coming to work with a good attitude and able to juggle many things, and has helped improve the work environment. Excuse me. So we were happy that she was our recipient this year for the this month for the Above and Beyond Award.
Great. Well, congratulations to Carrie. So grateful for her work. All right. So moving on to the COVID-19 response. Bill, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
I'm wondering if we shouldn't do the downtown master plan first, since the folks are all on the call.
Sure. That seems fine to me. Any objections to that?
And yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so, okay, so downtown master plan. And I see that we have at least someone on the line here. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about the update.
Hi, everybody. Mark Kane, SE Group. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm sharing my screen, so hopefully you can start to see that. I'll just get to the beginning.
I'm working on it.
I'm joined tonight by Patrick Olstad from SE Group
Can I just do that?
and Anders Terizo from Watershed Consulting. So first off, let me say thank you. I know this is, we're all kind of learning some new technologies and trying to understand how the world works given the circumstances. So I appreciate you taking a few minutes to talk with us about this project tonight. This is our second time to council, so I don't want to spend, going to rehash it all entirely, but I know there's some new council members, so we want to be recognize the fact that there's some new folks here who haven't seen this before or haven't had the opportunity to at least understand it in context with the work that was done. And I thought what I would do tonight is kind of highlight, for everybody's benefit, some of the changes that were made from the earlier draft. Let me preface this discussion by saying thank you for the comments. Ann was great to give us some great comments. We got a lot of other good feedback from staff, and I think that was really useful in the changes that were made to get to where we are. So thank you for that, thank you for that. I'm going to kind of give a highlight overview of some of the big things that the new version of the plan does, and Patrick, you can pick up and address any specific council questions if there are any. So the big thing I think that was really we wanted to highlight in this final version was to clarify for everybody's benefit what the preferred plan was. I think there was some confusion or perhaps lack of clarity around what the preferred hybrid plan was. And I'm going to skip down to that section, so bear with me for a second. And for those that have the document or have seen the document, it's on page I think I've got it right here. It's on page 30. So one of the things that was not as clear in the previous version was the sort of the recommendations on open space, infill, and bicycle pedestrian improvements recommendations. We wanted to make sure that we added some materials to kind of communicate that. So there's a new plan in the document, a graphic in the document that sort of highlights some of those elements. Patrick, why don't you just walk everybody through kind of the big takeaways for this, if you could?
Sure. So, I mean, this is basically kind of hybridizing what we had as separate plans in the first version of this report and keeping in all the stuff that we're ultimately recommending. I think the key things for this are that in terms of open space and infill, we had a couple parcels where we showed them as being either open space or infill, and we've kind of now gone ahead and made a specific recommendation. But in particular, this parcel here, next to where the bike path comes in, we're recommending that as infill. There's a small alley space up here with that open parcel that they're recommending as open space, probably in the form of more of like a plaza, given the scale of it. That doesn't mean it wouldn't have some green in there as well, but it's a little bit more of an urban sort of location. So I think those are kind of the key things that we honed in on in terms of land use. And then in terms of the bike ped component, we clarified that we're recommending the cycle track on Elm Street, which then would connect to a shared use path that would make its way down to the existing bike path. And so we are not recommending the dedicated bike lanes on Main Street in our recommendations. So I think those are kind of the key things that this plan clarifies.
Yeah, the other part of that I would just add was that there was some questions and some discussion earlier about the riparian zone, and I think this really clarifies that one of the key objectives of the plan was to identify that, from a land use perspective, that the priority would be to establish that buffer, riparian buffer, really establish that riparian buffer, but also assure that it's connected to the urban fabric, so that it's not just sort of sitting by itself. It's got, good ability for the public to get down to that riparian area so that it can be both a recreational amenity, also a stormwater amenity, for the street or stormwater treatment amenity, and a function as a buffer. So that was one of the core things I think we wanted to clarify. And we had added, just for everybody's benefit, this graphic that kind of highlighted that in the sense that this is the riparian zone. There will be some parking, but the idea is to create that buffer between it, and then also to make sure that there's a break or an opportunity to get from the streetscape environment to that riparian environment. So that was really kind of a core sort of a recommendation that we wanted to make sure came out in the final presentation. I think this is helping to do that. The other one I think I wanted to sort of spend a couple minutes on was just, sorry, I'm just going to flip through here. There was some conversation earlier about, the boldness of the plan, if you will. And I think, as you can all hopefully appreciate, the fact that this is a community planning process and there's always a blending of perspectives. And I think we had a really good steering committee and we had a really good set of engagements with the public. We heard a lot of different perspectives. But there was some concern or some thoughts around the fact that, well, is this a bold enough vision for Montpelier? And I don't have to tell you guys think big. You guys have always thought big. So that's great. But we wanted to sort of create this infographic to hopefully highlight the fact that there are some big things in here. And it may not seem it in terms of sort of the transition of the urban environment, but they are big in terms of how they position the city for the future. So, for example, it's 6 new public places within this study area, 6 new public spaces within this study area. 4 of them are park environments and 2 of them are plaza environments. That's the Rialto Bridge Plaza and the Town City Hall Plaza. That's a really big improvement over what's there today. That would be very transformational. And I hope you can imagine the Main Street or State Street with now a plaza environment integrated into it. That's from a visual experience. That's going to be a very different and probably rewarding outcome. The other piece I think that's really important is this graphic that shows the pedestrian zone expansion. So, we're going on different street segments. We're going from 38 to 52% more pedestrian environment while still balancing the need to maintain cars. And that's something that, as we talked about in the plan at some length, We heard from a lot of people in the business community that cars are still really important. The good news that I think is sort of relevant is that obviously we're making strides in expanding that pedestrian realm through these ideas, but also we're positioning for that number to go up even higher as the street evolves over time. So the idea of setting forth the street design that allows you to flexibly get rid of some spaces as the demand wanes is really the kind of the core principle here. So it's very conceivable that if these streets are constructed in sort of the approach that's been presented at 52% for Main Street, for example, within a few years that could be 60, 70% as you build out other parking facilities, as you create those connections to those parking facilities, and as hopefully as the demand for cars lessens, as we all get better at microtransit, better at using our bikes, and better at walking to where we need to go. So I think that's a big thing, and I think you guys are positioned really well to sort of make some strides there. The other one, and I know some people in the community are really excited about this, 80 more new street trees. That's in this little study area. It's relatively small. This isn't the entirety of your downtown. This is a small portion of your downtown. So that's really huge, and I think it comes also with a 15 times increase in the soil volume to help them grow. So that's a huge add, I think, in terms of the plan. We wanted to clarify that because the plan actually does document that, but it didn't really sort of speak to that. And then the last one I sort of point out this is 15% average per street impermeable pavement. Patrick, why don't you talk about that? That's a big number in an urban environment.
Yeah, so we're recommending the use of permeable pavers. These would be like a traditional clay brick paver that has joint kind of spaces that allow water to pass through it. So that's kind of in this designated tree belt zone where this paver band would occur, and so that's going to be really useful for getting stormwater, rainwater to the roots of the trees so they can really thrive. It also is just reducing the amount of water that goes straight into the catch basins and can potentially get some filtration action to improve water quality. So that's kind of a more progressive kind of way of doing things these days. South Burlington installed a street, and Burlington did as well in the past year. So
yeah,
kind of the way things are headed.
The other part of that I think is relative, going to this idea of how bold is this plan, how positioned is this plan ultimately to help the community sort of make those next decisions about what's the priorities, what's the design solutions, all of that. I think one of the things, and Anders, you can talk to this, is that we've made in this document and in this process a nexus between stormwater treatment and the development of the urban environment. And we've linked those together through that modeling process. And there was a lot of technical information that was provided in the appendix that some of you hopefully took a look at. That's really pretty deep stuff, and I'm not going to speak to it. I think we have somebody on the call that can actually speak to that. But really, from our perspective, from the planning perspective, I think the most important thing is it links, I think, in a real tangible way, the idea that you can start to transition your streetscape to achieve a stormwater treatment regimen and actually understand what you're trying to do in terms of phosphorus reduction, for example. So that's a hugely empowering sort of frame of reference for thinking about urban design and streetscape design. It's not just to solve the human problem of pedestrian mobility or placemaking or economic development activity. It's also to achieve a tangible, demonstrable stormwater treatment outcome. And Anders, you can speak this. Why don't you spend a couple of minutes talking about that, because this really, I think, does propel you guys forward.
Yeah, so can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, the plan that we proposed was really, as Mark was saying, was really based on a quantified study. And it started by meeting with Public Works and really trying to understand kind of the constraints within the study area, and also the really what the main water quality issues are within the study area. So, understanding that the soils are generally poor, building foundations are old. There's concern about infiltrating the water because of the poor soils, because of potential impacts to the buildings. And then also the fact that a lot of or I think all of the surface area within the study area drains to the river. It doesn't drain to the combined sewer. Only the rooftops, only some select rooftops in the study area drain to the combined sewer. So, starting with that information, what we proposed is really, I think, the best plan to, filter the water, basically remove nutrients as much as possible, delay the discharge of the water to the river, and, maximize the amount of benefit given the constraints, and also understanding that, really there is a limit to the amount of treatment that can be provided kind of within the streetscape environment, and that's why if you've looked at the other 9 larger scale projects that we proposed, I think those are really a pretty important key to the whole plan moving forward is to really get some really big water quality benefits. Those bigger projects, which are going to be collecting a lot more area, are going to be really important. So I think the plan kind of balances maximizing the benefit within the streetscape, within the public areas, and then also highlighting these kind of high priority, larger projects, which are going to require more public-private partnership and more investment, more cost in the future, but are going to be valuable for, reducing flooding and reducing nutrients to the river.
Thank you. I think the last thing I wanted to sort of highlight was really another kind of core point that we tried to make some clarification around, and that was the support of the purpose of this document, and obviously the ask relative to council at this point. And this document, I think the plan that was sort of presented as the recommended plan is still fairly malleable. I mean, it's going to change as the community gets more detailed into the design process and considers all of the other policies that the community has to consider in its city plan. The purpose we saw this document serving was as a frame of reference for as you go forward with some of those physical improvements that the streetscapes might go through. And obviously the Rialto Bridge is a project that's kind of in the forefront of where things are going. But also as you look at amending city policy, as you look at amending the city plan over time, as you sort of have those conversations about stormwater on a citywide basis, I think this plan provides you with a backstop to say, okay, how would we address those issues in this core, but how could this core influence what might go down beyond it? I think that's kind of the way we saw this plan. It wasn't meant to be, the design set for the streetscape. It really wasn't. It wasn't meant to be the entirety of the stormwater strategy, because this, again, only covered a small relative area of the city. But I think the things that it's introducing in terms of sort of policy framework and strategy framework are useful as a construct within the limits of the study area, but hopefully informative as the council, as the city moves forward and looks at how do you maximize the economic activity in your downtown? How do you address land use policy in the city? If housing has to go in the core, where are those infill opportunities for housing? But maybe the core's priority is less on the housing front and more on the open space front. Maybe that becomes the central tenet. So we wanted to make sure we clarified some of that in this final version, because I think there was another complete understanding of how this plan influences and serves the community, going forward as it continues to evolve. I don't know if Mike or Kevin, you want to add anything to that, because I think that was something we talked to you guys about quite a bit. And they're both on mute.
Anything you guys want to add? If not, that's fine.
So, yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I think that was a pretty good summary about what we're trying to do. We really just want to make sure we get a lot of the big decisions taken care of. Are we getting street parking or have on-street parking, and those type of questions that are answered at this step. There's a lot of stuff that the details will change, but we really needed to kind of get these system decisions down. And I think SE Group and their team did an excellent job of working with the public participation to come up with something that met with the public comment and kind of achieves the goals that we had set out. And now it's up to council to kind of decide whether this is the path we want to go forward on, and then staff can start working on the pieces and start building this out. Whether it's Berry Street, whether it's State Street because of the Rialto Bridge, we would start working with staff to put that together. And I think that's about all I would add.
Great. So at this point, I'm sure, or Kevin, do you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that, I went around and I talked to, actually Patrick presented to the MBA, and I went around and gave copies of plans to most of the businesses downtown, and there was pretty strong support for the concepts in here. I think people really did like the plaza concepts. And I was surprised because even the people that have, I talked to Sarah at Bailey Road, and she was like, this is great. Like, you would think that it's the parking space right in front of her place. And she was like, no, this would be awesome to have this in front of my store. So, the initial concerns around parking, I think, are allayed by the fact that it does require structured parking. And, it is that trade-off of saying, like, okay, well, if you want that walkability, there's the investment in structured parking. But I would say that for the most part, everybody was very supportive. And most of the business community in downtown, they understood that this was conceptual and that there will be future opportunities as we get closer in design to really get in there. But they liked the trees. There were only a few people who didn't like trees.
No name.
It's surprising where it came from, but for the most part, everybody really liked the idea of the increased walkability, really focusing on the pedestrian as the primary because of its small scale. And I thought there was really pretty good support all around for these concepts.
Great. So, Mark, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, obviously we're here if there's questions, if comments. Obviously we're here to help you understand what's going on.
So I'm sure there's a lot of comments or questions that councilors have. I can see you all at this point. So if you have a question or comment, if you would just raise your hand so that I know we can fashion an order. Okay, yeah, Connor, go ahead.
Yeah, Kevin, when you were talking to businesses, do you think they were supportive with the assumption that a parking garage would be built?
Yeah.
Or do you think they would be okay with actually reducing the net number of spaces there if we went through without having that clarity?
I would say that, granted, I'm generalizing of those conversations, but I think that, the plan is predicated on the parking structure. And I think that when it comes to the business community, there's a tremendous amount of frustration that the parking structure is not further along, obviously. But I think that they could embrace this when they realize that, okay, there is an alternative. We're looking at the streetscape differently, which looks great. But if this was just an elimination of parking without a parking structure, I think it would be a hard sell.
One thing that we heard too is that, or wanted to remind people, is the fact that the loss of parking, obviously this is not going to be implemented all at once in all likelihood. So there's going to be sort of a transitional piece. So if one segment of the street's sort of done at a time, State Street, for example, no change on Main Street for a while. So, it's going to be, that's an important consideration, I think, in some of the conversations we have with people. It's not like it's all happening overnight, all of a sudden the parking changes and the garage is built. So there's some recognition, I think, of that.
Is anybody hearing this extra thing?
A squirrel or something? Yeah.
I hear a little sound, yeah.
Does seem like old music.
Well, there's hold music from the public line,
Is that Mike picking it up?
probably.
Was there last time?
Mark, would you be willing to unshare your screen at this point? Okay. Okay. So is anybody else hearing this? Just, like a repeat of.
There's somebody on
Okay,
a phone. There's somebody on a phone line.
Somebody on the phone, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, it seems to have gone away. Great. So, other questions that people have, if you would just raise a hand, that'd be good. Other questions? Jack?
Jack muted.
Okay, unmuted myself. Okay, I appreciate having this for the second time. I really got a chance to spend some more time with Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry. I got a chance to spend some more time with it, and I'm looking at the comparison page, page 33. One of the things that we see is that there's a difference in cost between option A and option B. And I recognize we're just kind of conceptual here. Do we have a sense of what that difference would be?
I'll answer that. We don't. Is the quick answer. But I think it's just generally, I think that we're proposing some kind of more involved pavement treatments with those plaza spaces. So if we're proposing pavers, whether they're concrete or even stone, especially across the street, then that's obviously just more of an investment than if you're doing typical asphalt. So I think that's probably mainly where the cost is in those pavement treatments. In Langdon, we're showing that as all pavers, brick pavers or something. And so I think that's mainly where the additional costs would be.
Thanks. Should I keep going?
Sure.
Okay. I was trying to make sense of the traffic flow with the one-way southbound Elm Street and no left turn from Elm Street onto State Street, and I'm wondering if that's going to cause some traffic distortions, because if someone is on Elm Street north of downtown and they want to get to one of the businesses on State Street, it might lead them to loop around Court Street to Governor Aiken just so they can turn left onto State Street and get into that block between Elm and Main on State Street for parking.
I actually we have traffic engineers on our team with Stantec, and they'd be best qualified to answer this question. I just sent Greg Goyette a text to Kate, and I said that was kind of the arrangement. If we needed him, I was going to let him know. So I've texted him. We'll see if he gets on. He says he is. So I think once he's on, why don't you, if you could just go over that question? I apologize. Ask you to go over it one more time, but he's going to be able to give you a better answer than I am. Let's see if he's on yet.
I can tell you that Greg tested his connection the other day, so it worked.
Yeah, should be good.
There's no Greg. Oh well.
Mark, you're muted. If there's other questions, we can kind of go beyond and come back to that one.
Yeah.
that might be it for me for right now. Thanks.
So,
Other questions?
yeah, other questions? Whew, I was getting some crazy feedback here. But
everybody in city government's used to feedback, so.
Yeah. Well, it seems a little better now, maybe. All right, so, well, I want to thank you all for your work with all this. Thanks for taking all of my feedback. Thanks for, addressing some of the specific concerns that I had, and for your thoughts on what to do with some of the spaces, like next to the drawing board, as well as the riparian buffer. That was really helpful. So I'm trying to scroll back up to the top here. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Late breaking traffic engineer joined us, so we can address Jack's question.
All right. Greg, thanks for joining us. The question I raised was that with the one-way southbound traffic on Elm Street and no left turn onto State Street, are we going to cause distortions and problems with people who want to get to the block that they would be able to get to if they turned left from Elm Street to State Street, by causing those people to loop around Court Street, then Governor Aiken, and then left onto State Street, because that's also a tough place to turn left onto State Street from.
Sure, yeah, understood. Yeah, it would definitely be a change in traffic pattern. It's not uncommon for a downtown to have traffic patterns similar to that. So that is a trade-off in terms of the traffic pattern, but what would happen is with the one-way, we're prioritizing both pedestrian and bicycle movements on that road, and also that intersection as well, because it's a tough intersection to cross from a pedestrian perspective. So, yeah, I mean, there would be some trade-offs, and there would have to be a little more traffic analysis done to understand the implications of that in terms of what those impacts would be to the circulation patterns in the intersections if that were to be implemented.
Greg, wouldn't it also be true, though, that the changes on State Street that we're talking about, Main Street that we're talking about, might actually improve the usefulness of that for traffic flow?
In terms of what changes, Mark?
In terms of, like, instead of people taking Elm to come down and actually taking Main to come down. Because obviously, though, there's a traffic circle up above. The street's got a little more. I mean, I think there's some benefits now of the streetscape design actually making that a better, movement without the bicycle lane there.
Right. Yep, there would be some better movement there without the bicycle lane. Yep.
Right.
Except I may be wrong, but there are still going to be parking spaces on the south side of State Street between Elm and Main. Is that right?
That's right.
So then you could not get to those spaces from Main Street.
Just as an aside, though, do you think, Greg, that with southbound Elm Street and a right turn only, because of the proximity to where the future parking garage would be, it would effectively, that southbound Elm Street lane would feed you towards the parking structure. So if you were going downtown, it would be actually just more convenient to just pull into the parking structure, because it's turn right on the State and a quick left into the parking structure, and you're in downtown, and you're a block away from the core.
Yeah, that's correct. So yeah, coming down Elm Street, you would have straight access into the parking structure. And it's true, if you're coming down Elm Street, you wouldn't be able to take that left and use those parking spaces on the south side. But they could still be utilized by folks coming down State Street, heading west to east toward Main Street.
And I totally agree that that left turn from Elm Street to State Street is terrible much of the time.
Bad enough as it is now. Exactly. Yeah. I think the other thing.
Mark, I wonder if you should share your screen and pull up the plan, like the parking plan, maybe. It might just be helpful to take a look at that while we're talking about it.
Sure.
Sure.
We have the technology.
That's right.
Let's do it.
Wait, you passed it.
Oh, I did. Sorry.
Or where is it?
Right. Oh, it's right there.
There it is.
Let me just do the right view here. Yeah. So that sort of helps. I think that makes the argument there relative to the access to the parking garage and the idea that, again, with the treatment there and sort of an entry point into the garage established, it sort of actually may encourage the garage to be used because it's gonna funnel people right to it. So that's actually pretty handy. Yeah.
Do you think we're going to need a signal there because of the people, if people want to go right across the street to the parking garage?
You think, Greg?
It's possible there may need to be one there, depending on how the circulation changes and who ends up using Elm Street. But my sense is you're going to be removing left turns at that intersection too. So you may in fact have a little less traffic. You won't have any traffic turning left into Elm Street, and everybody coming down Elm Street would just have to turn right. So my overall sense is one wouldn't be necessary, but that would need to be studied further.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions?
Well, I do have a question about the maintenance costs of the pavers, maintenance and durability. And is there real life experience that supports that it's not any worse than pavement?
I would say that clay brick pavers are going to be a lot more durable than concrete paving, actually, because concrete paving is susceptible to spalling from salts, and the clay pavers are not going to. So I would recommend looking at downtown Winooski if you want to see how a clay brick paver can perform. It's held up incredibly well. I think the permeable pavers are a little bit newer, so that's maybe something that's a little bit less tested. But the brick pavers themselves are going to have the same durability. I think there's just some added maintenance involved with them, to keep the joints from getting clogged up with debris over time. So that's something that I guess should just be considered, before committing to it, to make sure that kind of periodic maintenance can occur. Otherwise, the permeability will just be reduced. I think it would take a while before it went to zero, but it would go down in permeability over time if it wasn't maintained.
And Patrick, just to add one quick point on that, Jack, is that by using a unit paver, if you do have to do maintenance or repair, the field that you're replacing can be smaller. So in terms of the cost differential, the long-term cost differential, if you only have to tear out 5 square feet of space to get to an underground utility because you're just picking up pavers, that's a lot cheaper than having to dig up 10 or 20 square feet because of its other asphalt or something like that. So there is some benefits of a unit paver that are sort of not necessarily about the material itself. It's just the fact that you're using a unit paver.
Right.
One question about that. Let's say somebody does tear up, the street for that. I assume you have to destroy the pavers.
Nope.
But you can reuse the same ones.
Yep. That's actually the big benefit of them. That is a big benefit in terms of being able to pick them up effectively, get them out of the way, put them back. Church Street Marketplace it's been decades of picking up pavers and moving them around, and they occasionally have to replace them. But it's a very efficient treatment in terms of being able to access the underground material, utilities and such.
Yeah, and aesthetically, it's better too after it's patched because you can't tell that anything was done, unlike when you saw cut through pavement or concrete.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Well, great. Yes, Dan.
Let me see if I can. So the question I have actually on the pavers, though, isn't what kind of maintenance, as far as frost heaves or not just simply scraping on them, but just how they settle over time. Is there any impact that there's a greater cost to those type of?
Well, it's actually interesting because one of my coworkers sent a link out recently talking about how the thinking on the base material used under unit pavers is changing. And I think what they're going towards more is an open graded stone as opposed to something packed really tight with fines, which is kind of more traditionally what's been happening. Because that type of treatment is more susceptible to that freeze thaw action.
Not just simply scraping on them, but just how they settle over time.
Something
cost to those.
it's actually interesting because one of my coworkers sent. I'm going to let this ride out.
So
Yeah.
I think the same thing was happening to both Dan and I earlier. If you have the agenda open and it's playing back what we just said, that's probably what that was.
So, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'll carry on.
Yeah,
so
go ahead. Yeah.
Anyways, with the permeable paving, it is a very open graded stone that lets the water pass through, and so you have much less susceptibility to that freeze thaw action. So I would not be worried about it. So I don't think that's going to be a maintenance concern at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit too. When pavers settle, it tends to be a flexible, settlement. So they kind of settle together versus a concrete sidewalk. When you have 5 foot by 5 foot wide panels or sometimes larger, you'll see one panel settle more than the other. And then you get a lot of, lipping that occurs between panels, and those have to be ground down or pavement has to be put in to smooth those over. So I don't see any more maintenance from a paver perspective over a concrete sidewalk, and maybe even a little less.
Yeah.
What? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, like to Greg's point, yeah, you see concrete pavement where at an expansion joint with one of those panels heaves up, and you've got an exposed edge, then they're going to get caught on the plow. And I think with brick pavers, it's a little more, it is more flexible, so you're less likely to have that situation where it's popping up enough to really catch a plow and chip the way concrete can.
Yeah, I'm not so concerned about chipping. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest, and the city I grew up in had a lot of brick paver streets. And the thing that I always noticed for years and years was that, they wouldn't necessarily be chipped away, or even if they were chipped, it was minor, but they would settle over time, and you'd have these big dips, either, like Greg was saying, across the row of pavers, but it would be a substantial dip where you'd have to almost stop before you got to it, or else they'd have these settling, almost like a little brick pothole kind of thing where it was a dip below. And my concern, at least on Main Street with this, is that, has there been any tests with this kind of heavy traffic, as well as sort of the frost, the freeze-thaw cycle that we go through up here?
Greg, I'd be curious to see what you say, but my guess is that the dipping is a result of like inadequate compaction or inadequate base material, something of that realm in the installation. But Greg, maybe you could chime in and see what you have to say.
Yeah, I agree. If pavers settle like that, it's usually due to poorly designed sub-base, maybe not enough underneath for the structural support, or just poor installation. We've seen in Burlington installations that hold up really well. The installations in Winooski have certainly held up over the test of time, and those have a nice base underneath them. They were compacted, and it comes down to the quality of the design and then the quality of the construction.
St. Albans is also holding up really well over 6-7 years now.
And is this with heavy traffic and all these in both Winooski and St. Albans?
Yeah. Yep. It's full on Route 7 traffic on the crossings. Yep.
I mean, Winooski, I think the brick pavers are in the pedestrian zone. I don't think there are any in the vehicular zone there. But Church Street certainly, and that gets really heavy trucks on it. I mean, there has been some breaking of bricks on Church Street, but that gets way more.
You did have to stop SD Ireland from driving their cement trucks up there for St. Patrick's Day. That was a big problem.
Right.
And then I had one other question about State Street and the parking. Was I correct in seeing that the angled parking that's right now in front of the post office is going to go away and it'll all be parallel parking along State Street?
That's what we are recommending. Yeah, I think part of that was to get maybe a little more sidewalk space, and also from a bike safety standpoint, if anyone's using State Street, it's just not preferred having cars backing out of angled spaces. But
Jay, I know you had a comment or a question.
Yeah, hey, not paver related. Mark, going way back to the beginning, I'm curious to get a little more detail and your thoughts on the infill off of Main Street, right off the new bike path, where you recommended infill, and just want to understand the balance between buffer with the river and the confluence with the North Branch and the Winooski there.
Yeah, I'll start. Patrick, you can just jump in there too. I think the idea for that, excuse me, that infill was, it's an environment. Obviously, Shaw's is an example. That's probably the spot you're talking about. And, at some point that may redevelop. That may redevelop at some point. We don't know what that's going to be from it. Am I muted?
No, you're good.
Okay. I had this message come up. We don't know what that's going to be, but I think the idea is that whatever infill happens there, I think the policy framework that we're sort of looking at it through is to one, make sure it maintains the riparian buffer, so make sure there is an adequate buffer on the back side of it, the river side of it. Two, make sure it engages the streetscape in some meaningful way, so that whatever is put there is not just kind of like, parking in the rear, can we do that and do it right? And also that there's an opportunity for people to get through that space to get to the river. That's kind of the basic policy framework we're looking at for all infill, is especially infill that's related to the streetscape edge, is that it's got to be permeable enough, porous enough to let people get to the river. So much like the current bike path is sort of achieving that, if something redevelops on the Shaw's lot, for example, the hope we would have is that it would still allow people to get down to the river some meaningful way, that it would not just sort of be a wall that prevents the access to that. I don't know if you want to jump on that, Patrick.
I think, just we're really trying to reestablish the more historic development pattern of having those buildings right up at the sidewalk. Multi-story, probably 3-story building, kind of following that pattern of what's there versus the 1-story building set back with a parking lot in front of it. Obviously it's not a great gateway to the downtown, so we want to try to make it more in character with the other part of the downtown.
Super, thanks guys, that's really helpful.
Great.
Other questions? Jack?
Still muted, Jack.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was trying to click the little microphone on the picture of me, not down at the bottom.
I did that too.
This is new to me. Okay, Greg, I'm glad you're still with us. This is something that I've thought about for a while, and I just noticed a comment in Front Porch Forum raising the same question. And it's not to do with anything we've talked about or anything that's in the report, but it has to do with addressing the two alleys that or driveways that go off Main Street into the behind building parking, the one next to Aubuchon and the one next to the vacant lot, and whether it would be feasible and desirable to set it up so they're both one way. One is one way going in, one is one way going out, so that it would potentially reduce pedestrian conflicts, especially if cars aren't coming out of that very narrow alley next to Aubuchon, and what that would do to the traffic flow on Main Street.
I'm going to chime in real quick. Yeah. In our plan, we actually did address those, and we recommended that they become closed to vehicular traffic completely, and being just pedestrian only. And that was an idea that we kind of came to in talking to Stantec. So, Greg, you might want to just chime in and explain that idea of how the parking would be accessed and how that can function.
Yeah, sure. We would try to focus the access to the parking areas in somewhere where the main driveways are located, and closing off some of the smaller driveway accesses where if you're walking on the sidewalk, a car pops out. It's a pretty dangerous situation. And likewise, for a vehicle popping out of those driveways, there's no sight distance around the corners of those buildings. So by focusing or condensing some of the driveway locations to fewer spots, that actually may improve traffic mobility on Main Street, because you have less traffic popping out in rogue places where they're trying to take a left out of that driveway, and cars are stopping and letting them take that left. And if they're focused in a few spots versus several spots, our thought is that is going to improve mobility along Main Street and improve safety for pedestrians and vehicles.
I'm sorry I didn't focus on that. How would people get to that parking in the back of those buildings under this system?
Yeah, so we would still have a few driveway accesses. So Aubuchon, where the new rec path is coming in toward Berry Street, right? Yep. There's a left-hand turn into that new driveway that was constructed. So there's access back there to get in and out. That's a two-way access.
Okay. And that would be the exclusive access to the parking back there, probably.
That would be if we close the other alleys down, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Greg, would the other alleys be, at least one of them be probably open for, I would think emergency vehicles could get in there if they needed to.
Yeah, that could happen, of course.
Yeah.
Great. Any further questions about or comments about the plan? Jack, go ahead.
Sorry to keep going through this. One thing that it's really more of a question than more of a comment than a question. In the streetscape comparison, page 33, you note that option B maintains more convenient on-street parking on State Street, which another way of putting it is that option A provides less convenient on-street parking on State Street. And for people who want to reduce parking and vehicles on State Street and have more bikes and pedestrians, that actually would seem to be a plus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fair.
So I guess I think what we thought ultimately in our recommended plan was the kind of the hybrid option, mm-hmm. which maintained more parking on State Street. And you're right, Jack, for some people that maybe isn't a positive. From some of the input we got from some of the business owners, they did want to maintain the parking there. So I think that was the case of trying to find the balance. And we thought that with the hybrid plan, we're still enhancing or expanding the pedestrian zone significantly enough that it was, still quite an improvement over what's there. So, and we did maintain that kind of more enhanced plaza space of option A. So that was a case of trying to find a little bit of a balance between those competing
interests, I guess.
And as I sort of started this conversation, I think there's an opportunity to evolve that over time. So as the parking demands change, you can start to reclaim some of those spaces
Right.
and turn them into more pedestrian environments. So I think the street shapes could adapt to the need.
And in the short term, you still have the ability to have those parklet spaces out there to provide outdoor dining, and so that's another kind of flexible approach to that.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, so this agenda item didn't, at least in the cover sheet that we got, it didn't make a mention of recommending, like, the suggested action was not necessarily to approve this plan, but I suspect that might be useful. So I'm curious from either any of the staff, would some kind of a motion to accept this plan be useful to you, and then we can see if there's a motion.
Yeah, I think a motion would be helpful because they're going to have to work to make final edits so they can get a final product. And again, as Mark has pointed out, this will be a flexible document once it's completed, but they do need to have some final guidance so they can move forward to get a final plan per the grant agreement. We've got to be wrapping this up. So, yes.
Okay, and certainly that could be, Jack, it's your thoughts there. You want to talk more about that or amend it, that the plan as recommended, that's something. But Donna, you had something you want to say.
Well, again, the plan is just a based reference. And so I feel it's, where we need to be to this add on in the future as things change.
Great.
So I would like to see us pass it as it is.
Do you want to make a motion?
Okay, I thought maybe you, okay.
It doesn't matter.
Jack wanted to incorporate changes anyway. Yes, I'll make a motion that we adopt the Montpelier Downtown Core Master Plan.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further thoughts? I think it's important to note, too, just speaking to Jack's point about the parking east of the Rialto Bridge, that's something that we could also revisit later, but I think I agree, this takes us in that direction, and I think there's a lot of really wonderful steps in this plan. So any other, Dan, yeah, go ahead.
Well, just along those points, is this something where is our understanding that where if we approve this, that there would be an opportunity to revisit or to tweak some of those more minor points as we come along?
I'm going to assume so, but staff, either Mike or Bill, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can just jump in to say that this is the conceptual plan. Before this can ever move to getting built, we're going to be having to go through design and final design, and there are multiple steps that will be going in where we'll have to have, Stantec or somebody do the traffic analysis on those intersections so we can get final designs and final turning radiuses and everything approved. So there's going to be multiple opportunities to make some of these smaller edits that are going to need to be made along the way. This was really to get more of the bigger concepts down and approved so we know what direction we can get DPW working on and the planning department working on.
Donna, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Mike, are those opportunities to come back before us, or are those before the Development Review Board opportunities? Just to be clear.
These would come back to City Council at some point because we're going to be, whether we're applying for grants or just approving in concept. Think of this in the same way that we did the transit center. It was approved as a conceptual plan in 2000, and then we built on that conceptual plan that said, this is where we want to have a transit center we built on that to go through and say, okay, well, what's it going to look like? What are the final details? What's the accessory, secondary use going to be? And these will continue to come back to council. You guys ultimately make the decisions on these.
Okay, that answers my question. Thanks.
Donna, anything further?
No, Mike covered it.
Okay. Okay, any further questions? Okay, so there's a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 And opposed? Okay. Great. Well, thank you again for all of your work on this. I think really it's going to take us in a really good direction.
And thank you guys for all the hard work you're doing for your community. I've talked to a lot of people around the state, and I know it's a tough time, but I'm sure your citizens appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good night.
All right. Have a good night. Yeah, so that's
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
pretty exciting step there. So looking back to the agenda, so coming back to the city's COVID-19 response, and at this point I will turn it back over to Bill.
Great, thank you. We had sort of three areas we'd like to go over with you tonight. One is just outline some of the activities that have gone on. I sent that out to you. One is to include Montpelier Development Corporation and Montpelier Alive in this conversation at your request, and Bill Kaplan just dropped in and joined us. Welcome, Bill. And then Kelly will provide a brief update on where we are with finances, and I think she'd sent that out as well, all of which are challenges. So I'll just launch into this. We'll try not to go too long. I think the biggest thing for us today was addressing the governor's last executive order from last night and trying to make sure how that jives with what we're doing. I think the biggest decision we're trying to decide is whether to actually physically close City Hall on Monday or Tuesday. We decided to close the offices but still leave the building open so that people could come in and get warm and use the bathrooms and those kind of things. Berry City has confirmed with me that they've actually physically closed their offices since the 18th. So we're trying to wrestle with that and how that fits. We've also gone through, we're in the process of going through every employee here in this building and through our organization to figure out who fits which category and which ones can work from home and which ones can't and should and those kinds of things. So those are all have been our top priority. We are dealing with any referrals and communication with people. They've been the Zoom technology has been great for a lot of our meetings. As per the decision last week, the digital parking meters and kiosks were put into sleep mode. We've held at least one or two Facebook Live discussions with the mayor. We hope to do more of those. I think those have been well received. And the most recent one, we also got a sign language interpreter to interpret the video after the fact. We weren't able to have it done live. We met with staff, and the mayor met with the Montpelier Mutual Aid Group. I think the most exciting thing that's coming forward is there's a group called the Thrive Regional Response Command Center, which is teaming up with the state and the Washington County Homeless Task Force that had been formed to basically deal with the human services gaps and the vulnerable population. This is being headed up by Sue Minter, Eileen Peltier, and Joan Marie Misek, and they're in full incident command mode. I had a phone meeting with them on Sunday, and essentially some of the concerns that I've been expressing with the city not really having the capacity to deal with some of this is really being taken off our shoulders by this group. Our Ken Russell from our homeless task force has been linked in with them. Not to say there aren't going to be problems, but they've already got up and running along with the state renting out a couple of hotels for people, so homeless people are now not in congregate shelters, but rather in individual rooms with their own bathrooms. I think that's probably a safer, more comfortable situation anyway, so it's probably a good outcome in the big picture. Obviously, we're still working through the details. We've been meeting with officials with Barrie City, Barrie Town to make sure that we're all backing each other up on critical services like water treatment, sewer treatment, those kinds of things, and that everything. We've had information from Green Mountain Transit about their daily bus disinfecting protocols. The Sustainable Montpelier Coalition and the mayor have connected to launch the CAN initiative. And the schools have reached out to us. We've had discussions with the schools as well as their partners in education, offering assistance. Again, I think that group will really best link up with this vulnerable population task force and who are looking for volunteers. Talked a little bit about sheltering. The senior center has a van, which we are letting the homelessness emergency response team use for transportation. So that's great. That's helping getting people to where they need to be. Another way has closed for in-person services. As I mentioned, we have homeless people now residing in hotels. Internal communications, Kelly's going to talk more about this, but we clearly will have a budget gap as a result of this, a loss of revenue. And so we are looking at all options for that. I know at your last meeting you were hoping that we could identify significant cuts to reinvest into the community. We're thinking we may need to make significant cuts just to keep the city rolling for the rest of the, till the end of the fiscal year. We've issued new guidance on sick leave and how to use working from home based on the CDC's guidelines and also this new federal act. And as you've been copied on, we've been trying to communicate regularly with city employees to know so they get a sense of what's happening and also communicate out to the residents different steps that we're taking. I probably will do this again to communicate to the residents tomorrow after we conclude tonight. So those have been the basic things that we've been working on, trying to keep ourselves rolling along, serving residents, but also providing the proper protections and things. So I'm happy to answer any questions about any of those.
Connor.
Yeah, Bill, just in light of the sheltering in place executive order from the governor, what role does the Montpelier Police Department play in that? Like, are they authorized to sort of give misdemeanors for people out? I'm just kind of wondering how that plays out day to day.
The chief is here and can answer that, but I might save him a trip up. There was a guidance sent out by the Department of Public Safety today, and I believe you may be copied on it, though it's probably in one of the many things you've received. But it's basically urging voluntary compliance, urging people to clarifying what is and isn't okay to do. It's certainly okay for people to be out for a walk as long as they're keeping safe distance. I think the question is if people are really intentionally violating, and there was a whole series of things. I don't think they're going to become the congregation police, but certainly we would be looking to urge people to do the right thing. But there's a very good guidance written by Colonel Birmingham from the state police to all police departments that I think you've been copied on. Anything else you want to add, Chief? No. Okay.
Now we thank everybody for complying.
Excuse me? Oh, so the chief is saying he'd like to thank the public at large for complying, that it's been very cooperative.
Donna.
I had a question about a term Bill used in his manager's report about the planning department being quarantined. It seemed different than the other lock the doors, don't let anybody in.
So
it made me concerned.
Yeah, there was a potential exposure, which proved not to be the case, with a family member of one of the planning department staff. So we did take a little bit extra precaution there and closed that office to the public. That family member has since had a negative test. So that was the reason for that term versus everything else. But they are still, given the governor's order, they are still primarily working remotely.
Yeah, I was just concerned, but it made me think, if indeed one of our employees became ill, would we be able to know to give them support, or is that confidential?
It's a little bit of both, and I think the term, unfortunately, that we probably need to be using is when one of our employees becomes sick, because it's almost certain that many of us will. And it's a question of how many and what impact it has. There are HIPAA requirements, but we also have, the impact of others that might be involved. Hence the reason for people trying to be away from one another and not having the public coming into our offices. So I kind of evaded your question because I don't really know how, if I can tell you, Bill Fraser's sick today, send him.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other comments? Lauren?
A few thoughts and apologies that the Lorax is loudly playing in my background and I can't figure out my headphones, so hopefully the audio quality is okay. So one thought I had was just, I talked to Bill about this a little bit, but just really encouraging like as much proactive communication as possible. I know I've been seeing stuff on Front Porch Forum and stuff, but I think even more just reminding people of all the resources on our website and when we can connect people to this new Thrive group. Today, for example, there was a post about how we're closing the city offices. It didn't, that could have also included, and remember to look for more resources on our website for how, if you want to volunteer or if you are in need of things where you can find resources to get you what you need. Just encouraging as much as we can to be out there every single day with here's the resources, because there's so much good work happening and making sure people know about it and that the city's kind of on top of it. I would just love to see that. And even stuff like, it was great to see like Lost Nation Theater had a fun thing they put out. If we could put out fun stuff too, everyone's, sheltering at home, and how are we just kind of keeping our community connected and together. So just encouraging that as much as possible. Like I loved the Facebook thing that the mayor and city manager did, and just more of that. I'm just encourage that so we can keep people updated. Hopefully you're enjoying the Lorax in the background. Apologies.
An all-time classic.
One question I had was, I guess it'll be coming up in the coming weeks, but like what plan do we have for the city in terms of looking into, so, any time now, presumably this big stimulus package from the federal government's going to be passing, which has a chunk of money for cities and states, and then state stimulus and efforts, and just, who and how can the council help with looking at what kind of opportunities there will be to get that kind of money into our city. So we're helping our residents and our local businesses. So just curious if the city manager or anyone else has thoughts on kind of how we can track and access and make sure that we're doing all we can to bring resources to our community.
So we're obviously following the bills closely, as are the League of Cities and Towns, providing us information about how to do those, and we'll be we're already, as we've thought about people's leave, we're trying to structure it. There's some that's reimbursable through these acts and some that's not, so trying to think about how to get people in the reimbursable kind. So definitely top of our mind, and we may, of course, be coming to the council to approve grant applications or those kinds of things.
Just two other quick things. One, it could be helpful to talk through a little bit. We touched on it during last council meeting, and I know that the city staff has been doing a lot of thinking about like what's the redundancy in our systems and who can make decisions, knowing that today the announcement that we are on an exponential curve of this pandemic affecting Vermont communities. So just a plan for how decision making can happen and just more clarity, because I know staff has put a lot of work in that.
Yeah, so we've developed a sort of authority matrix for every department, or are finalizing that. We've gone 4 deep with each department, and understanding that we could have multiple people sick at once, and hopefully will be sufficient. We will go deeper if it looks like that's wise. We have a general continuity of operations plan, which is being rapidly updated and also sort of particularized to this type of, I think most of our continuity of operations plan assume that, we got flooded out or, knocked out of operations somehow, not necessarily a long-term pandemic like this.
One big bubble.
What's that? Excuse me?
I couldn't hear what you were saying. Just all bubbly. Maybe it was only my reception, but
Was
most
that
of what you said the last 2 minutes I couldn't get.
everybody else? Was that the same?
Everybody else is fine then?
Okay.
I could hear you okay.
Okay. So anyway, we are working on continuity of operations plans, and it's absolutely a necessity. So we're doing that. You and I took briefly under Vermont law. Right now, at least, the council can't take any action without a majority of the council present, a quorum, and in fact, even then, it has to be the majority voting similarly. So if only 4 of you are present, all 4 have to vote yes for something to pass. That hasn't changed. So we I haven't done more thinking since we talked yesterday, Lauren, but we might want to think about and maybe talk with our attorneys. Is there a way that the council can take preliminary action to authorize the manager or someone to act on their behalf if the necessity should enact? And I don't even know if that's possible, but I think it's something we might want to look at preventively. I know some other communities are doing things like increasing spending limits for the staff or the manager so that things don't get held up by having to go to a council that can't meet. So we haven't, we don't think we're there yet, but those are all possibilities.
Thank you for sharing all that and all the work going into being prepared. I guess just one last thing I was thinking about, and I don't know, is that John Odom there? Just with this change to, or opening up that elections could be done differently, just would love and offer myself to work with the city clerk and whoever else, but just thinking about how we can start preparing right away for how our primary election in August might look, and that we're being as accessible and getting ballots to everyone who needs it in whatever format, if it's mail, if it's whatever contingency plans we can come up with. So just hope the city's thinking about that as well, and happy to help with that however I can.
I'll just, if you're curious, we've already been gaming out how to push the mail option as much as possible for voting by mail, and the Secretary of State is working on legislation which I think might have gone through today that would also push that at the state level and would provide money to cover the costs to municipalities. So yeah, those conversations are underway.
Thank you.
Great. So I would love to talk a little bit more about the budgetary impacts. I know we got an email from Kelly earlier, but wondering if you could outline that a little bit. And then I'm so glad that Bill Kaplan from the Montpelier Development Corporation was able to join us. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about that afterwards.
Well, it's up to you which sequence you go. You all had invited Montpelier Live and MDC to this meeting to talk to them about what they were doing on behalf of the local businesses. So they're here now, but we can do it in whichever order you like.
Well, Bill, I don't know if you have a preference. Since you're here, maybe we can talk about the MDC. I think we really just wanted to touch base with you and the MDC in general about what you all are thinking about the current crisis and how
the MDC money could be used towards even just helping preserve downtown businesses.
If I could just share an update before Bill Kaplan goes.
Sure. Go ahead.
We had been receiving some conflicting information all day, including from the governor's press conference and some other things. But it had initially seemed like many retail stores would be allowed to stay open if they only did pickup or delivery services. That was the initial guidance we heard from the downtown program and what the governor and Secretary Curley said in the press conference earlier today. We have just received word that that is not the case, and that it is indeed that almost essentially all non-essential businesses will need to close. There are some exceptions, which include restaurants, food service, including food stores and specialty food stores, automobile supplies, pet food. There's certain exceptions where they can keep serving folks, but retail businesses are only going to be allowed to operate with the proprietor themselves. So just the one proprietor of the business can still fulfill orders that can be shipped. Or potentially it seems like if they do zero contact delivery, that would probably be acceptable, but the pickup is no longer going to be an option. So there had been a lot of businesses that were still open downtown that were doing curbside pickup, or still had staff working and fulfilling deliveries, and that will no longer be the case. So unfortunately, it's a worse case scenario than we were anticipating earlier in the day, and that's why I've been in and out and distracted if you've been looking at my video feed, because I've just been getting this information in the last 5 minutes. So I'm working on communicating that to folks presently, but that is the update. So I think that's important for you to know in the context of the rest of the conversation.
Great, thank you. Bill, would love to just hear any thoughts you all have on the current situation.
He's unmuted.
It's a little hard to hear you there. Doesn't look like you're muted.
Did he check his volume?
Is that better?
Yes.
Oh, what happened?
Oh. Seems like we either get your picture or your voice.
Hang on.
Oh, got it.
We heard you there for a second.
Okay, now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. I apologize for the delay.
Okay.
Some of it has to do with fat fingers and some of it is thick head. Let's see. So the first, thank you all. I mean, amazing to see everybody in their different places working hard on this. And these are very trying times. I think that we've had, MDC has had an emergency meeting, a board meeting. We've talked, Dan and I spoke this morning. I think that, the first thing I'd like to say is that out of the conversation this morning with Dan, MDC will be funding some help for Dan with a kind of a resource person that would come in, and I think that one of the pieces here is going to be after this wave of closures and everything else happens, there's going to be a need for people to tend to their businesses,
And at the same time, there are all these resources and programs and insurances and things that it's going to take a level of expertise. And as any of us know, even just making an insurance claim takes a lot of time. For these government programs, whether it's the SBA or some of the federal programs or tax relief, I think there's going to be a need for some assistance and some expertise, and someone who's got to open up their business again will need some help. And so I think Dan has been kind of the front line and really handling communications. And I think instead of redundancy, we'd like to slip in underneath and fund a support person for Dan, who would be specifically kind of a community resource for assisting people in their recovery and accessing the resources that are available. That said, economic development is this, we've talked about this long-term horizon piece. This is a whole new way of looking at it. And we do have funds, and MDC is willing to kind of give the funds over to whatever efforts the city believes they should be used for. We don't have, the team and the board are geared for projects and long-term things, not for this type of crisis. That said, every one of us is, working hard both in the community and at the jobs. Everyone at the board meeting was talking about incredibly long hours. I mean, as we're speaking, things are happening. It is a trying time, and so I think that if there's a way that MDC funds can be put to use in the immediate, that MDC is open to that. We just don't have, as you know, we have this project manager system, so we have that for to help Dan. If there's another way to do it, if it's just a complete relinquishment, however it works, MDC is looking for the best path forward, and we're just open to seeing what happens. But also, if there's something that needs more immediate attention, then you'll just need to let us know.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Dan, do you have something to add?
So I'll just talk briefly about what we've been doing. I hope that you've seen our communications around businesses that are open and closed and takeout options and all of that. We've had thousands of people visit our website to get that information, and we've been working hard to keep it up to date. Some days we've had as many as 60 updates to make in a single day on that webpage. So it's been pretty constant. We've been doing a promotional campaign. I don't know if you've seen the bridge today, but the back page of the bridge, the front of the Times Argus, every day in every single issue of Front Porch Forum, paid Facebook, paid Instagram, all that, to try and get out the word about how people can continue to support downtown businesses, pushing the idea of gift cards as a way for businesses to get cash flow. I've been on many conference calls, email chains, et cetera, trying to get, the most recent information out to businesses. You may or may not know that there's a downtown business Facebook chat group that's pretty active and has been especially active during this period. I've also been sending out email updates both to members, but also to basically every business owner whose email that I have. So I want to be clear that we've been offering our services to anyone who I can get in touch with. Sending out emails basically every other day to business owners. That's on top of the Facebook conversations that we've had and individual phone calls. I've had many one-on-one calls video chats, et cetera, with business owners, talking about their specific needs, help some folks set up online operations, which will be able to continue in some limited capacity in this new world. So hopefully that will serve them well. Connecting people with resources like the SBA loans. There's the initial round of SBA loans is available, not the broader federal stimulus package that hasn't been approved yet, but an early round of SBA loans. Connecting people with business advisors, other resources, providing suggestions, all of that. And that's in addition to the public updates. We've been doing the daily email newsletter and the daily Facebook live chat, if you've been seeing that, and trying to be as active as possible on social media to get out the word. We've had conversations with various people at various points who have suggested starting some kind of fund. That's kind of what Bill Kaplan was referring to just now in terms of providing funding to some resource pool. I think the challenge that we keep running up against.
That's don't mean to interrupt, but that isn't what I was talking about. I was talking about the person that we talked about as a resource.
Okay. Well, there's the possibility that some funding be made available from whoever for some kind of pool, whether it's donations, private funders, foundations, NBC, Montpelier Live, the city, whoever it is. But there's a lot of challenges around how that's administered, who is eligible, what are the criteria. It's complicated, and there could easily be hundreds of eligible businesses in Montpelier alone. And so, if we're talking about $10,000 or even $100,000, it's not going to add up to much per business. I think any real support, we're looking towards state and federal response for businesses. We've been advocating, and a lot of other people have been advocating for as many grant options as opposed to loan options for businesses. I've heard loud and clear from a lot of businesses that taking on more debt in whatever form that is, that including, as helpful as things like deferred tax payments and water sewer bills and things like that are, ultimately that's essentially a form of a loan. It has to be paid back at some point in the future. And businesses are operating on pretty slim margins as it is. And so taking on this additional debt when they don't know whether they're going to be able to repay it is a concern that people have. The stimulus package that's agreed upon federally, it looks like it does include some loan forgiveness type programs, loans that can turn into grants if businesses follow certain criteria. I was on a call with Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility and Congressman Welch this morning, and he said there are not any answers yet on any of the rules of what that ends up looking like. So, we're trying to get clarity around. It seems like if businesses agree to keep their employees on payroll, that they will then be eligible for these grants as opposed to loans or loan forgiveness in some form. But it's unclear what that looks like in terms of, does that mean everyone has to stay on payroll? Can you reduce hours? How long do you have to keep people on payroll? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all very unclear when people are going to get access to any funds. I've had a few people who have tried to apply for that first round of SBA loans and said, the website took an hour to go from one page to the next. The same kind of thing people are running into with filing unemployment claims, all this, all the systems are just super overloaded. So it seems like a lot of people think they can eke by their March, like payments. Rent payments are a big one that people are concerned about. But there's a lot of concern about April. And obviously we don't know what April looks like at all. But it's hard to imagine a scenario in which we're back to full economic activity in much of April. Unlike what President Trump might want to say. I'm hearing a lot of fear. I'm hearing a lot of, there's just so much uncertainty on every level and not very many answers. And so, trying to support people in the ways that we can. But ultimately, we're going to need the federal and state support to have any real impact on saving people.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Any questions or comments for either Bill or Dan at this? Dan and then Jay.
Well, I'll just thank both of you for the work you're doing, Dan, particularly. I mean, that's huge lifting that you're doing, especially with that webpage. But, I guess the question is that has anyone reached out to the landlords for these businesses that, as to whether there's any need for sort of intervention in either rent payments or types of forgiveness that's going to create instability in the business right away with the April rent payment?
Yeah, so we've encouraged people to reach out to their landlords, but I'll remind you that it's not like we have huge corporate landlords in Montpelier. It would be one thing if Brookfield's Properties owned all the buildings in Montpelier, but I'll give the example of where my wife's store is. The building is owned by Kelly Sullivan, who's another downtown store owner. Eric Bigglestone of Capital Stationers owns the building that Walgreens is in. So, there's a lot of these small landlords, and they're grappling with the same problems as anyone else. They have tenants who are struggling to make payments or need flexibility, but they're not, they need the relief from their lenders or from whoever it is. So, there's a... I'm not that somehow, because I think we have a downtown landlord here on the line with Bill. But at the same time, has there been that conversation, or is there any sense about, is this the first big crisis that these businesses are going to face, or is there something else? You mentioned April, but I'm curious in breaking down what part of April are causing fear. And I think that people are having conversations with their individual landlords, and they're trying, from what I understand, landlords are trying to be as flexible as they can be. I think if it's a matter of getting the payment at the end of April instead of the beginning of April, landlords will probably be flexible about that. And, some people have been talking about payment plans or other things, but ultimately the landlord has to make their mortgage payment and their, XYZ payments too. So, Bill, maybe you could speak to this. Bill Kaplan could probably speak to this from the landlord perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is, it's an ongoing conversation. I talk to tenants every day. And in Montpelier, where it's a startup, not necessarily a startup, but it's a new location for Rabble Rouser. We're in touch once or twice a day, working out things, and I have some resource lists that I have been sharing with all the tenants. It's interesting. Different cities and states have been dealing with this differently, and I think that as things unfold, there will be programs and things like that. I did talk to a banker today in Montpelier. I don't have any commercial loans in that I was talking to them about, but it was but they are, when people ask for relief, they are willing oftentimes to put the deferred payments at the end and extend the loan, so that there are options for landlords, and then those benefits, even if it's just a suspension of go to only interest only, or payments like that. Some of that, there is a little bit of kind of slack in the line that can be moved down to tenants, and I think that's part of what this resource person could work on with people. What we're thinking about is maybe a retired banker or someone who's embedded in the community already, who knows a lot of the players, and also understands kind of bureaucracies and pieces like that, so that we can in real time and afterwards position ourselves. I mean, there's so many conflicting reports of whether you people who are kept on the payroll will be reimbursed. People who are relieved will get full 100% unemployment. I just think it's so amorphous right now, and there are so many pieces that it really does make sense to kind of support and triage at this point, and then really, if we can be the best informed downtown about how to make use of the resources available, it will give us a quicker recovery. That's the theory behind what we'd like to do. Not sure that's answering any question you asked, but.
No, that's actually very helpful, and I appreciate both of your responses. I think it makes sense, at least to me, that right now we're sort of in a triage state, and but at the same time we have to be looking to position ourselves to take advantage of these recovery instruments as they come out. But first and foremost, right now it strikes me that a lot of these businesses, they have to have the conversations like your tenants are having with you, Bill, or and understanding that as Dan pointed out, it's not a bunch of faceless corporate landlords. These are their neighbors and other downtown businesses. So I think that's really helpful, and obviously anything that the city can do, I
think we can make it Takeout Tuesday, and we can call it Fill Up the Freezer on Friday, and get people getting pre-made pizzas and all that, putting them in the freezer. Don't buy the ones in the supermarket. Buy them from Positive Pie. Buy them from you can now order a really nice piping hot pizza, and it will come with beer to your house. So all those things are. I think they're promoting them.
Unfortunately, restaurants are not actually allowed to deliver, only liquor stores, only if you have a Class 2 license. Some folks are not maybe following that rule, but I don't think anyone here is going to complain too much. But the official state guidance.
I think in Montpelier you can make such orders.
A Class 1 is not allowed to deliver.
Class 2 licenses for.
Jay, did you have a question?
Yeah, just real quick, I'll echo Dan Richardson's sentiment about Bill and Dan Groberg, the work you're doing. It's really appreciated. And I just want to, in these really trying times, and Dan Groberg, I just want to, I think, support your instincts in that around the idea that Montpelier Live, even with the support of the MDC, could actually be some sort of fund to support businesses. As an organization, the pockets just aren't deep enough. There's too many businesses in Montpelier to really make an impact. Financially, and spread it equally. There's so many deserving businesses in town that need the support. So I think steering customers towards businesses, and then also supporting those businesses in connecting with resources that the state and federal government make available, really will have the most long-term impact. And to that point, Bill, I love the idea of the MDC supporting Montpelier Live, who you're right is more sort of on the ground on a day-to-day basis with local businesses, and supporting some human resources to be able to consult and work with those businesses to navigate these times. It seems to me like you're actually talking about two different things, and I don't know, maybe there's that person that can cover all this ground. But on one hand, yes, you've got something. Like you said, you're looking for somebody who can be there and be a resource and help navigate the financial challenges that the businesses are having. Meaning, all right, how do they approach different loans and or grants, and how do they, are they moving on to something that's an interest only, or negotiating with their, with their landlords, et cetera. But then there's also this very immediate piece, it seems to me, that you've both alluded to, that is trying to wrap their heads around what the state and federal government are offering and what's available to businesses, and it's changing hour by hour, right? So I don't know if that person exists that can bridge the gap between sort of managing, what businesses are doing with employees, how they're managing unemployment, how they're, what they're eligible for, what should they be applying for an SBA loan, what are things that are existing, but then also trying to wrap their head around what is available to them immediately. Even local lending institutions, BSECU, announced the $2,000 emergency loan, 0% type, thing that's available right now to individuals and businesses.
It's not available to businesses.
And then also, what's the best approach? I think I just worry that it could get convoluted, and I appreciate.
Yeah, so we've been playing that immediate role. Montpelier Live has been playing that immediate role in terms of telling people what's available. That specific ESCCU loan is for individuals only, I'm afraid, not businesses. But so we've been telling people what's available. Like North Country Federal Credit Union has a loan that's available to businesses. The SBA loans that are available right now, we're anticipating that the VITA loans will be available relatively soon as the legislature can get its act together. At the state, they can't even figure out whether they need a quorum or not. So I don't know. We've been providing that information to people. There is no comprehensive database of every single business in Montpelier. I have been attempting to, I've been telling people, share every communication I send out, share this far and wide, but I'm sure there are people that I'm missing. Anything that can be done, I think the city has been doing some level of sharing the information that we get out, but mostly the things we've been sending to business owners have not been sort of public-facing documents that could be shared, because we don't want to confuse the customer, with information that's relevant to businesses and maybe not to them. So, it's a balancing act.
Lauren.
Thank you both for all the work that's going into this. I mean, what an incredibly challenging time. I guess my question is, I hear you loud and clear that the real game changer kinds of things are whatever the federal and state government could do to support our local businesses through this time. And I think the idea of having people there to help navigate that makes a lot of sense to me. So that's a great idea. Thanks for bringing that forward. I guess I'm also wondering kind of what Dan mentioned of, it sounds like it's not game changer kind of stuff, the things that the city has done or could do, but are there ideas of what the city can be doing specifically? I mean, knowing we're going to be facing a really challenging budget situation, but are there things that, keep money in people's pockets for enough time as they're working through the, loan application process? Are there things that you think the city should be looking into that would be helpful that you're seeing in other cities, or any other ideas that you hope would be on our list to look into?
Certainly clarifying. I know when the guidance came out about the property taxes, there was a statement that said like the city would also look into the water sewer bills, which are actually due before the property taxes, if I have my timeline straight. So clarifying if it is indeed the fact that people can delay the water sewer payments. If there's any other, there's not much that's really within the city's control. Parking permits are maybe something, but they're usually paid annually or every 6 months or something like that. A lot of businesses have downtown parking permits. Ultimately, there's not a ton, and I certainly recognize and respect that the city doesn't, that the city has these financial challenges coming forward also. Burlington, just put $1 million towards this resource pool, part of which is going to go to businesses through their community economic development office, but they had Burlington Telecom proceeds, special one-time proceeds that they applied towards it. We're not in that position. The one thing that I will say that might be helpful is, and this goes beyond the business community, is that some kind of task force at the city level coordinating. I don't know that there's necessarily communication between like the schools and the city and the business community, and that just at the city level. So smaller than what Bill had mentioned in terms of that regional effort that I can't remember the name. But something at the city level to just have everyone thrive. Thank you, Anne. To have everyone talking to each other.
Thank you.
Donna.
Sorry,
go ahead, Bill.
Because I think that the city could look towards some non-monetary pieces, and I have seen some other towns and cities establishing kind of new norms, at least new temporary norms, and that idea of like the city tonight voting on Takeout Tuesday and Refresh Your Freezer Friday, and with local foods. I think that you can do things like that. It just gets people back into some of their reestablishing some patterns and some habits, and that little bit helps a lot. I have elsewhere. I have a pizza shop, and they're down to half of their business, but they're doing it only in pizzas and only in frozen and takeout, and it does help. It lets them stay employed, lets them kind of normalize and get through. And I think that there is some of that can happen in Montpelier, even with these restrictions that Dan was talking about. People are there and trying, and I think the city can do some things just by getting it in the paper that they've declared this, or other pieces like that I don't know. I'm trying to be hopeful about that.
Interesting, the idea of non-monetary supports or encouragements.
Well, certainly, and I emailed, they may already be on it, but I emailed Bill Frazier and Seth this morning about it, but linking directly from the city webpage to our Montpelier Live business update page. That's pretty simple, sharing that kind of stuff on Facebook as often as possible, making sure that anytime you're doing an update about city operations, that you're also reminding people about that kind of thing. Yeah.
Donna, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just taking a little different picture, but since you have these businesses involved, I'd like to get a better idea of a long-term need, such as what's the minimum it would take to keep businesses open, and start gathering information on that so that we can look at our resources, not just for today, but more long-term, because I see several months ahead, and I'd like to have what that would take, so then we can start looking at resources differently. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just say, so much of this ultimately depends on how long we're talking about. I think that most, although not all, businesses could probably weather 2 months. But then, the further down the road we start getting, even the businesses that we think of as the strongest anchor businesses in Montpelier might start feeling it. So, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think even this, even 3 weeks, I think we'll probably see some businesses that can't make it through. I think there are resources going to be made available, but whether they come soon enough, whether as many resources and opportunities as we provide, ultimately it's dependent on the business to access them. So, there may be some people who just don't, who can't make it work, who aren't able to apply for the SBA loan, even with hand holding or whatever the case may be. So, or have such fundamental underlying business challenges, who may already be on the brink, for instance, who don't make it through this. So, but I'll also say that ultimately, though the businesses themselves are not, making it rich, our commercial real estate market is quite strong. We see pretty low vacancy rates downtown. I think there will probably be I know there's some people who have previously expressed interest in opening downtown who haven't been able to find a space downtown. So there may be some new opportunities. The labor market may be a little bit more open for people. That's been a huge challenge for downtown businesses, is accessing labor, especially for the restaurants. If there is
But Dan, I think Jay used the term triage, or maybe it was Dan, but yeah. I think at some point we have to step back and maybe be a little more pessimistic, just as the hospitals are doing, as saying who's going to be first served, and making some tough choices as to what businesses can hold on, because it's going to be more than 1 month. It's going to be probably more than 3, 4, and have an idea of where to put the best attention of what we have. I think we may have to do some of that assessment. And so we can't do that without people being willing to at least base share some information of what their reality is, if they can go 2, 3, 6 months.
Well, I think I hear Donna's point about, obviously if there's a business that's about to go under, we don't want to put resources into it that's not going to stop the inevitable. But at the same time, I think we have to be very careful about picking winners and losers in this kind of situation. I'm not saying that you're suggesting that, but I think we just have to be really, really careful, because, this is one of those situations where it's going to be a lot of businesses that may not make a decision until the end. But
you can't do it without information, though.
No, I agree. I agree.
But the doctors take a patient in and they get information and they try to make some assessment. That's all. I'm just saying we shouldn't keep our head in the ground and avoid it.
And I've been
absolutely.
I've been asking businesses to be as transparent as they can be. Historically, businesses are not typically eager to share their sales information, even when we're trying to be helpful to them and promise confidentiality. I think, we're doing our best to tell people that, but I certainly don't. I appreciate what you're saying about triaging, and I appreciate, and, on some level agree, Dan, with what you're saying about we don't want to be putting money into businesses that are already failing, but I don't think anyone wants to be in the position of having to choose winners and losers. That's an impossible task. As the city council figures every year when they try and set their budget, you just only winners with the city council. So.
Well, and it may
in terms of like, winners and losers, that may depend on whether or not we have funds to actually, for the city, to be able to leverage. And, based on the conversation I think we're going to have, I'm not sure that we do have a lot of excess funds anyway. So, but anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Any further questions for either Dan or Bill? Okay. Well, thank you for taking a little time, and we certainly are interested to know if there's anything further that you think the city can be doing. I'm intrigued by this idea of takeout Tuesdays and freezer Fridays or whatever, or any other non-monetary supports that we can offer. I am still interested in figuring out if there's ways that we can, if we do have funds, what might be the best use of those. But thank you, Bill, for your openness about, being willing to take suggestions. I agree with the council as well, being able to offer the support of, someone who knows how to navigate other funds, I think will be useful. So, if no one else has any further,
can I just add one thing on this?
Yes, Bill, go ahead.
Since we're all here in public and everyone's here, I just want to say I've been stopped in the last week by two different downtown businessmen. Both happen to be men, to compliment Dan Groberg. I think maybe not understanding the work relationship, thinking that somehow he's connected to the city, but to go out of the way to talk about what an extraordinary job he is doing, and I think we should recognize that. I've certainly seen it, and make sure he gets the credit while he's here in front of us, all of us. But these were unsolicited. People pulled me aside to tell me that.
Should all clap.
Yeah.
Hey, Dan.
Well, and I'll pass a lot of that credit on to my employee, Ashley, which thanks to your increased support in this year's budget, we were able to hire that person, and she's been in charge of most of the website updates while I've been dealing with the business owners and the bigger picture stuff. So she's been sick of me forwarding her emails with us to update the website. So thank you.
Thank her for us.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. Well, I think all that leads into conversation about the city's situation.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Do we have a
Good
break?
night.
Take care.
Sorry?
Thank you all.
Do we have a break? It's 8:30, 8:40.
Other folks, do you want a break?
Sure.
Just 5 minutes.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Let's take 5 minutes. Well, how about let's reconvene back at 8:45. That's like 4 minutes. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. We'll take about 5 minutes. Thank you. Bill and Kelly, are you all set? Do you need another minute?
I think we're good to go.
Yeah, because we only have the one mic, I'm just turning this right over to Kelly to jump in, and then we'll share after that. And just so you know, she's sitting where she is so that you all can see her face while she's talking, but her back is to the screen, so she can't see your faces. It's just kind of a little awkward. So she can.
I can do the side thing. That's easier.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to sit on the side, but.
Okay.
It's all good. Thank you.
They'll be able to see you fine.
Great. All right, good. That works for me, just as long as it works for everybody else. So I did send talking points earlier tonight, just because I wanted to get those out before the meeting. We have been working quite a bit on the budget since the last meeting, and so I kind of wanted to put out there, some of the questions that you had asked us, which were, looking at FY20 and 21 with an eye towards freeing up money for community assistance. And then number 2 was a review of the property tax structure as it relates to first floor retail to consider abatement that might be offered for delinquency. And so we have looked into things. And so the long story short, just kind of getting into it, is this will be a problem in 20 and it will be a problem in 21. And we're just trying to figure out what that means. During the budget development cycle, we hold things pretty tight, so the margins are pretty thin. We have evaluated sort of the budget to actual line items, and we've also looked at capital expenditures by way of projects, but then also looking at equipment. And so there's not a whole lot to free up, especially when we're trying to kind of assess where we're going to come down in all of this. So right now, it is looking like we're going to have a revenue shortfall, and that's attributable to parking and also to local options taxes, and so that's the tune of about $210,000 that we've got to try to figure out how we're going to make that up. And so we're looking at everything. The department heads have reviewed their budgets. We do have information that we're vetting right now to see what we can come up with. There are some viable, things on the table, and so we're scraping by, but, there'd be more to come on that plan. It's just in terms of being able to free up money that then doesn't go towards, dealing with the deficit that we'll be facing with the revenues, is going to be tricky. So I can't see you all right now, so I'm going to do a quick look in back of me and see how it's going. Looks good. Okay. So far, so good.
Well, actually, can I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
Please.
So you said that there's a revenue shortfall, and that's before, or I'm sorry, is that after we've looked for, delaying equipment purchases or projects?
So some of the things that we have on the table right now will go towards offsetting that. And so we're trying to figure out, well, right now, based on what we know, how bad is it? But then we're also in unprecedented times, and we just don't know how long this thing will go. We're projecting out to the end of the fiscal year, but even then, the implications could be far-reaching, and so we're trying to be really conservative and making sure that we have enough to get by in 20, but then into 21, so we can focus on core operations and keep the city running for our residents. Is that kind of probably not the answer you were hoping for, but
no,
I also
okay.
want to get it out there.
I'm just going to jump in here to kind of try to distill that down. We've got the budget was already tight. We were probably going to have to tighten the belt just to make it anyway before this all happened, and with so we're definitely by our choice and appropriately, we are foregoing parking revenue. We're also probably foregoing or going to lose almost all of our rooms, meals, and alcohol tax. We don't have a hard number yet on what our rec and senior center fees that we would have brought in yet. That we're still calculating those numbers. So if we're going to be slightly spending over budget and we've got this shortfall, just to make that gap work and keep our core city functions going, that will include canceling some of the projects and delaying equipment and those kinds of things that you've talked about, and we're trying to get a handle on that. Part of the problem we have is we're already, you know, into March, almost into April. A lot of that stuff's been bought in our current fiscal year. So we have more flexibility for the following fiscal year, but we don't know yet whether by July 1 everything will be back up and running and we'll just be back business as usual, or we'll be still in the midst of what, you know, I think this is going to be longer, not shorter, but I don't know that any better than anybody else. So, you know, as time goes by, we'll be able to figure out what our choices going into the next fiscal year are. But right now, we're trying to just see how we can bring the ship home in our current year and not have too deep a deficit to carry forward into another year. So that's where we're at. We're finalizing numbers. Like I said, we actually have a team meeting tomorrow morning to go over this in more detail, and our plan is to have a much more detailed plan for you for the next meeting. But as the first weather report, that's where we're at.
So, you know, with that, you know, some of the things that we also did want a little bit of guidance on. Well, actually, before I jump into that, I kind of wanted to give you sort of a rundown of what we can anticipate in property taxes. And, you know, a normal cycle in the fourth quarter, we would be expecting about $2.5 million to be coming in. Thankfully, looking at the delinquencies in the past, our residents pay their property taxes, which is awesome. But then we've also had comments from, you know, auditors and the like that have said, wow, you know, you really get your property taxes. And so that's great. I did take a look back to the Great Recession to see if maybe we saw a blip there, you know, and revenues coming in, and we didn't. But this is also different. So there's that caveat. But I did sort of track to see, you know, what we have coming in automatically in payments. So that's about $1.1 million. And so there's about 1.4 that then, you know, comes in through, you know, taxpayer initiated payments. So that's where some of, I think, the risk is. And then that being said, you also did ask me to look into the downtown, you know, business district and sort of what that looks like. And so this is a higher level figure in terms of being representative of commercial spaces, but then also, you know, apartments and the like. And so that's about $760K. So it's just good to, I think about that in terms of thinking about, you know, who's impacted most by this pandemic and what we would be looking at, you know, in terms of exposure, and, you know, where people might come in. And so it's just a thing to note, just based on what you had asked. And then, you know, additionally, moving on to the next thing that I wanted to mention is that we do have some other budgeted or non-budgeted things that are coming up that we should really talk about that may play into this. And, you know, we've, you know, got an elevator that we need to service, and I can, you know, list off the price tags associated, but, you know, we have a property that we need to figure out what we're going to do with, and then we've got the reappraisal, which is kind of a big ticket item that we'll have to figure out. And so these things would be happening anyway. So it's just kind of weighing them against our current situation. And so that's also some food for thought in terms of thinking about what we have for resources and what we have to pay for coming up. It's just a reality. So then that sort of leads into, you know, finally thinking about, you know, when we think about what we're doing and how we can best support the community, what that looks like. And, you know, is it core services, or are there other additional items that are maybe not necessarily traditional base budget items, that, you know, may need to come off the table if, you know, we want to remain whole and to keep doing what we're doing, in terms of providing city residents with the support that they need. And so some of those items, just to kind of lay them out, would be, you know, they'd be hard to think about, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. The Homelessness Task Force, the Ash Borer Fund, Montpelier Development Corporation, which I know we just heard from them, and that was a really good discussion. The social justice grant, and then the arts fund. So it's just those are some of the things, and that's about $190,000 of discretionary items. But thinking about what do we really need to fund, and what are we funding, and it's all good. But it might be in terms of prioritizing where our resources are going, what things stay and what things go, or what things come back online once we have, a better revenue picture. It's just some things to consider. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping will resonate, but then we'll have more of a plan, for sure, as we get on here, because we would already be looking into the closing out of this fiscal year. And then with this crisis, we just really need to be careful. So I can't see you, so I'm going to turn around.
Dan.
Yeah, I had a question about the reappraisal. Is the reappraisal, have we reached a threshold where it has to happen, or is this just, is that it? Do we have any options as far as the timing of that?
So it does need to happen, but I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
So we are about to hit the threshold. And I think we've been trying to preview this in the weekly memo for a while. The state recently changed the threshold from people at 80% of common level of appraisal to 85%. So it's a high, you hit it faster. Because of that, many more communities are hitting it. And so the demand for reappraisal firms is sort of at all-time high. So most of them are booking 3 years out. So our strategy had been to put out an RFP, book a firm for like 23 or 24, and start setting money aside, because it's a big ticket item. And we're going to have to do it. We're going to be ordered to do it. But the time being what it is, up until this crisis, we were thinking time was on our side for this, and it still may be, but it's just something to consider when we think about hitting the future. Is right. That's out there, and we know we have this $134,000 property liability in December, and maybe we'll choose to sell the property after what we just heard from the downtown plan, but we don't know that yet, and we have an elevator that is on its last legs, and we just recently got a cost estimate saying really what you need to do is overhaul the whole thing for $100,000, and that's unexpected. But for us to have an accessible building, we have to have a functional elevator. So and those are normal budget challenges, but when you add those considerations into a budget shortfall and trying to and support, we're really looking at everything. What functions are we not doing right now? Are there cuts that we can make there? So it's not an easy discussion.
No, I just, especially with the reappraisal, it struck me as something that because it is such a big ticket item, and B, something that either the state could waive, or that, depending on the circumstances where we were at. And I also wonder even if, we are going to see any type of downturn taking a hit on property values, which may change our numbers. So we stop being closer to the edge. But anyway, I just wanted more clarification. I appreciate that, Bill. Thanks.
Other questions? Lauren?
I guess just one thing picking up on the reappraisal. I mean, I don't know if that's something that the LCT or other communities will maybe be asking for a delay. I mean, the kinds of things that in this kind of emergency, maybe the state could give a 5-year window or something as people are rebuilding to not be putting money towards that right now. So maybe we could think about something like that. We could help advocate for. I imagine a lot of communities are in the same boat. And then I guess, is there any learnings from 2008, when the ERA money came out, or, are there any expectations? I mean, obviously it's just so unknown right now, but, would you have any guess, still having, been through upturns and downturns of the economy, of what kind of, federal help might possibly help cover any of this, or is that just not, just too unknown at this point?
In 2008, it all really went to infrastructure, and we were able to use some of that for fixing up a few projects. I mean, we got the biggest energy era grant in the country for the district heat project. That was, I think, our biggest sort of turnaround out of that. But there were other funds that went to various infrastructure. And that was in part because it was designed to put people back to work. Create construction projects, so that people will have jobs. I don't know how this will be targeted. It sounds like, hopefully local governments will have some opportunities in that, but I would suspect, appropriately, most of this is going to be targeted to businesses, landlords, employees, maybe even financial institutions who take a hit on mortgages or those kinds of things. I don't know yet what this is all going to look like. But certainly if there were an infrastructure component, then maybe some of the projects that we delay out of our own budget might be able to be picked up from that.
Jack, go ahead.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good, thanks. Thinking about the elevator, I think that's something we talked about in the ADA committee. And am I right in thinking that that's an expenditure that we may be able to get a grant for?
Yes, you are. And so that's something that has come up and that we are working on looking into and exploring still. We, in terms of trying to figure out how much is this going to cost us, that's sort of where we've been focused. And now that we have a pretty good gauge on that, the next step is looking into the grant and seeing what that would mean for us potentially.
Okay, thanks.
Connor.
I was just going to say, following up on Dan and Lauren, if there is consensus that we should try to get a waiver on the reappraisals, we might want to consider taking a position on that tonight and communicating that, just because it's all moving so fast at the State House.
I think that's really interesting. Other thoughts on that? Dan, go ahead.
I'll just, I think we have to be careful because the reappraisal has some constitutional and court-imposed conditions on it. The fair market value, there's a lot of case law and ink that's been spilled on that. But, obviously it might make sense to even look at our own numbers first and just see, exactly what our timelines are. And then, Bill can find out if other towns are in the same boat, from the VLCT or otherwise. But, ultimately, yeah, I think if we're all in the same boat, it's one of those things that if everybody has this problem, they'll find a solution for it.
How do you feel about that, Bill? Can you look into that?
Oh yeah, no, that makes sense. And I want to be clear. We want to just put those out there. I mean, some of these are normal things that you deal with when you're dealing with a budget. You're adjusting. I think our only point was we have these big ticket items in light of now what's going to be a significant revenue shortfall, an uncertain FY21, and potential demand for reallocating funds somewhere else. So you can't make decisions without seeing the whole picture and knowing what you're up against.
Well, at least for my part, I feel like I've had my questions answered. I certainly was hopeful that we would have some funds to have some flexibility with to put towards some kind of relief, but sounds like we're going to be just trying to make our own ends meet. And I know we don't have to make any decisions about that tonight, but it's good to have this sort of early warning. So at some point you may be coming to us, I assume you may be coming to us to say, we have to make some tough decisions in reallocating funds.
And I don't know what that timeline looks like or what that decision-making process looks like, because I think sometimes, I mean, you all administratively would just reallocate funds internally sometimes. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it depends on the nature of the decision, but certainly depending on where we come out on this, we'd want everyone to be on board. I mean, obviously, if we had to take an emergency action, we would, but we'll certainly keep you in the loop all the way, and it would be good to make, we wouldn't want to. Some of it would involve making priority decisions. So even if it's taking from one project to another, you should probably weigh in on that. So it's we will work as in sync with you as we can.
Okay. And you'll keep us informed.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. Okay, any other thoughts or comments about, yes, Jay?
Yeah, sorry, just a really rudimentary question. I'm just wondering where that 150K number comes relative to parking. How many months does that assume that the meters are off, et cetera, in trying to balance out priorities? Thanks.
Sure. So it's about 3 months. Parking is about $50,000 per month lost based on our projections at this point. And so that's the kind of long and short estimate of it.
We, because that's what you pay us to do, we're trying to be cautious. So we took the assumption that this wasn't going to all just be over in 3 weeks. And so we projected, basically assuming till the end of the fiscal year, till June 30, that we wouldn't see any really substantial parking revenue. Because it's also possible that even if things open up, we might choose to not charge for parking to try to get people coming back downtown and all that sort of thing. But also, similarly, we assumed essentially no more rooms, meals, and alcohol tax during that time frame. I mean, we might get some small little bit, but nothing like if all the restaurants are robustly open and hotels are full and those kinds of things. So, and as I said, we also haven't even got into our other program revenue yet. So we think this is a pretty conservative estimate. Hopefully we're back in business sooner and it's not as dire, but we can't afford to be optimistic and really end up in a hole at the end of the year.
That all makes sense. Thank you.
Lauren, and then Donna.
Just on that point, was there any success when we did the holiday, donate if you can? I'm just thinking, is there something, could we have little signs, Montpelier Alive, or it goes to something, if you, I know we turned them off, if you physically put quarters in, is that?
I think that's right. I don't know if they even take money right now. Okay. But we didn't get a lot. I mean, it was a fun thing to do. It was a small sum of money that came in. And that was also with a lot of people downtown, parking and shopping and doing those things. And people are being asked not to come downtown, and there aren't really any stores open for them to come downtown. So,
Donna, go ahead.
I'm not sure if this question can be done in general session, but it has to do with the parking garage and where we are, but also where Bashero is, with hotels being what they are and what's going on. Just how vulnerable does that make the garage project?
I don't have specific information on that, but it's certainly a great question. We do have, for the next regularly scheduled meeting, an update on the garage project planned. Be a similar presentation and those kind of things. So we will have hopefully real answers to those kind of questions.
Okay, thank you.
I realize this is only sort of related, but as far as we are aware, has this affected our credit rating at all?
Sorry, I was like, go ahead. No, we're good.
No, it has not. Not yet, because we've been able to make all our payments. Again, we remind people we borrow our bonds the city doesn't really have a specific individual credit rating like, the state does, or maybe the city of Burlington does. We borrow our bonds through the Vermont Municipal Bond Banks. We're pooled with all the other municipalities in the state. So the bond bank has a bond rating, but the city doesn't have its own bond rating. Our other local borrowing for our tax anticipation notes, bond anticipation notes, is really with local banks, and they look at our history of payment and one of the things that's been good for us has been our strong tax collection. This could change those relationships in the future, but right now it hasn't.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of things I want to flag, sort of separate from this as well, is I just want to recognize that Dan Groberg brought up this idea of a task force, linking different organizations. And I know there's a lot of groups already that have sort of popped up or are emerging. And anyway, that's something that, I would love to talk with some staff about offline at some point, just about taking some kind of coordinating or, what kind of leadership role makes sense for the city, and especially connecting with Thrive. So I realize that's a separate topic, but
so just briefly,
sure I said that.
So we are connected with Thrive. We were in with their organizational call, and we're on their phone calls and on their tree, and they're just picking up a lot of the work on the human services, but still in communication with us. The idea of having a connection maybe with the school or a couple of the key organizations, maybe we could arrange one of these Zoom calls, a couple times a week just to touch base with everyone. So I think there's a good opportunity there.
Okay. Any further comments on this topic? Okay.
Can I make a
all
further
right.
comment just really quickly related to the consent agenda and the bond anticipation note that was voted in favor of earlier? I need you to come down to City Hall tomorrow and sign that, if that's possible, or I can also come around and collect signatures. And so I just wanted to kind of get a sense from folks how they wanted to do that, just so we can make that happen in as remote a way as possible.
These two.
And I can also take the liquor licenses too. So, or we can, so I just wanted to mention that, and I'm flexible. I may have some helpers with
Donna.
me. Just saying.
Okay. Donna, go ahead.
We used to pick up or sign things at the police department. Could they pass it through us, their window? We have that distance between us.
I didn't think they were open.
We'll figure that out and get back to
Could
you.
they be?
They
Do we
could.
access it for us to sign?
They can. Technically, yes. You'll have to buzz in, but we can work that out.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So if that's what you'd like to do, I can make sure that the documents are available there tomorrow.
So just let us know when that's set up.
Yeah, and then I can just I'll send you an email first thing tomorrow and just kind of let you know that they're there, and then I'll pick them up at the end of the day and scan them in and get them over to the bank.
Just everybody bring hand sanitizer before you sign it. Okay. All right, so wrapping things up. Yeah, and everybody bring their own pen. Yeah. Okay. So council reports. I'm gonna intuitively go with the order that we normally go in. So I'm gonna start with Donna.
I have nothing to say, but thank you all for all your attentiveness, staff and council members. Thank you.
Great. Connor.
Just one quick thing. I think it's fallen through the cracks, but the Red Cross is just at crisis level as far as blood donations. Just with the schools closing, we had to cancel ours at City Hall, I know, a couple weeks ago. But there is going to be one for people interested on the 30th at the Episcopal Church, and there's still spots available. So if you want to call 1-800-RED Cross, you can get an appointment for that. That's going to be really important the next few weeks. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Connor. Jay.
Yes. Certainly thanks to all of you and staff and for everybody's hard work. I guess just one thing that I wanted to add is I thought it'd be important to acknowledge the leadership that we're seeing from Libby Bonesteel, the superintendent of schools, as well as the principals, the teachers, and the staff and everybody in the school district. It's been an incredible transition for all of them. And I thought, as a parent with 3 kids in the district, I've just been incredibly impressed by their hard work and their compassion in managing this transition. And so I just wanted to acknowledge all of their work, which I think is important. And then also acknowledge also all the parents out there that are trying to not only be teachers and homeschool their kids, but figure out a way to make a living and work from home as well. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Dan.
So I want to give a thanks out to the groups that have been meeting for the capital area neighborhoods. I connected with Dan Jones and gave him a whole list of names of people that were really willing to step forward. And I wasn't able to be a part of the conversation I think they had today. And maybe you were, Ann, and you'll talk about that. But I was just really impressed. You know, one, it's really easy to get a hold of people when nobody has meetings or appointments to go to. But 2, there's a number of people out there that are willing to step up and step forward in this time, and it really.
Great, thank you. Jack.
Just a couple of things. Again, it's all appreciation for what people are doing. Everyone who's working on getting services to people without permanent housing, and I'm probably talking to Ken Russell just about every day, and everything they're doing and the creativity which they're approaching it is really really tremendous. But we're also seeing just great things from our local residents. All over, people are doing great stuff. I was at Shaw's yesterday shopping for the next 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, and I ran into someone I know who said that he's just been devoting his time pretty much full time to volunteering to go shopping for people. And I was there at lunchtime, and he was on his 5th Shaw's run of the day, and he said he's usually been doing about 10 trips to Shaw's every day to pick up groceries for people who need them and don't think they can get out. The city is doing a lot of great stuff. The Parks Department is collecting and distributing firewood to people who are running out of firewood because they're home all day, so they're heating their houses all day. And so the city arborist has been cutting up wood and coming to my house and picking up firewood for people. And so this really has, it's the beginning of a disaster, but it really has brought out the best in a lot of people.
Yeah. Lauren.
Just a couple things. I did want to mention, I've seen that if people don't have health insurance right now, you can sign up right now. There's a window through April 17th where you can sign up at Vermont Health Connect. So urge people who might need health insurance just to know that that is open and available to you. And if you have a change in job situation, that is normally open anyway, but it's open to everyone right now. So hopefully, as many people as possible can get the health coverage they need. I also just wanted to echo, thank you to everyone for staying home, for following the advice we're getting from our medical professionals and public health experts. And, Chief Bakis brought it up earlier that we're seeing great compliance. And so thank you for following it so we can do our best to keep as many in our community as healthy as possible. and just like so many others, just am so appreciative of all the volunteer efforts and ways that people are stepping up to help each other and make sure that we're taking care of all of our community members in so many ways. And the city website has a bunch of links of mutual aid networks where you can both sign up to volunteer if you're able to, or flag if you have needs, and that somebody could help you with. And, and even some of the fun things the city's doing, like a scavenger hunt to bring out for your kids. Maybe that, I don't know if that's still cool to do, but, just different ways we're trying to take care of each other while we're all in this situation. So appreciative of the volunteers and the city staff that have been working so hard to respond to this emergency and figure out how to do their important work in different and new ways and really challenging times. So it's really appreciative.
So I also just want to add to that. So I was able to be on the call with the capital area neighborhood leaders today. It was good to just connect with everybody, to see everyone's face and know who some of our leaders are, and know that more resources are going to be available to them to get to their neighborhoods more specifically in the near future. And also just so grateful for all of them and all the other volunteers in the city who have really stepped up to be willing to help out in whatever way they can. Also, just again, also thankful for city staff for navigating all the challenges with these times, and also just a reminder to folks to as they need to, stay active, stay grounded, and certainly reach out if there is anything that they need. There's a lot of networks who are ready to help folks. So we're here and ready in what way and in the ways that we can. I guess that's it for me. John, did you have anything?
Oh, I should probably mention that we've added a little bit more restriction on the clerk's office. Some things that were available by appointment, such as marriage licenses, notary services, and hands-on work in the vault, we're currently cutting off completely, except under extraordinary circumstances, in which case someone can speak to me directly and we'll work something out. I also wanted to mention that, we get a lot of calls, and I'm starting to get calls from people who are scared to various degrees. And, I'm not in a position to do much good, but I wanted to encourage people to keep calling, and we'll do what we can, even if that just means listening.
Yeah, thanks. Bill?
Obviously, I'd like to thank all the work our city staff is doing. They're scrambling to try to make this all work. I really appreciate it. I'd like to especially call out Cameron and Seth from our staff and David from ORCA for getting all this tech together and making it work. I think it went pretty well tonight. Sound is, we can hear you all perfectly in the room. And so you're all up on the big screen. It's pretty cool. And I think we're going to actually offer this option for our staff meeting tomorrow morning when we try to sort through some of these challenges. But it's been hard for people actually, and but I really think for the most part our folks have kept the people in need and the people in the community first and foremost, and I really appreciate that.
I agree. All right, so I think that is everything. So thank you all for making this work online this evening, and we'll see you again. We have another meeting.
Right now, your next meeting isn't scheduled for 2 weeks, April 8th.
April 8th?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Obviously, if we need an emergency for any reason, we'll let you know. Now that we know how easy it is to do this.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, well, thanks everyone, and I'm going to call this meeting adjourned.